Greetings, and welcome to my channel. This is Sorcerer Tal. You can also find me on Facebook in the Sorcerers Guild. Today on Magical Theory and Experimental Magic, we are going to be talking about how to create a haunting, as well as how to take a ghost with you when you move. Okay, now of course you may have noticed I haven't put out a video for a while, and part of the reason for that is the same reason that I have been thinking about ghosts lately. I have started conducting ghost tours in downtown Salt Lake City, so I've had to take some time learning the script and getting used to telling the stories, and I've been also taking a few tours already. So I've been a bit busy, but here I am. I'm back now, and I will try to keep putting out a video every Saturday from here forward. Anyways, let's get on with it then, yeah? Okay, so why would one want to create a haunting in their home? Well, there are several reasons for that. The simple aesthetic. Some people have an appeal to that. I personally enjoy the fact that my house is haunted and I have ghosts around, but the ghosts aren't just there for aesthetic purposes. There are ghosts around that protect my home. There are ghosts that watch out for different problems that could occur. I have even some that help me with my divination and help me with other forms of spell work from time to time, as well as helping me contact other dead. And so, as we begin to interact with these ghosts, we can find more and more reasons to want to have ghosts in our home. Of course, a ghost that we're bringing in with a created haunting may be a little bit different, depending on how we go about that. So what I mean by that is, if we bring in a ghost intentionally, we may already have an idea as to what we want that ghost to do once it arrives. Anyways, so there are a few different types that we're going to talk about today, and how to create these types of hauntings, or how to replicate them. The first one that we're going to be talking about is repeater ghosts. And this is one of your more cliche types of ghosts. The sound of laughter in another room, the sound of steps on a stairway, or gunfire at a battleground, things like that. And what these are, well, they're not exactly ghosts. What they are is memories from a location. The place itself has actually formed a memory of an event or a repeated sound. There are two ways that these repeater ghosts are created. And both, like I said, are creating a memory in time of the place. But one is either with an intense moment. Often in the common folklore, these are tragedies. Like if someone is murdered at a location or something, sometimes these sounds of that murder will be repeated because the intensity of that moment has actually created an echo in the location. And that's what will happen with these battlegrounds and stuff like that. But the one that is more easy to repeat and has a more flow with the word repeater ghosts are these type like laughter in another room, or footsteps on a stairway or down a hallway. And what these are is repetition. Often it will be the repetition of intense moments. If someone has been walking down a hallway many times for a very intense reason, these are very likely to create repeater ghosts. Like a person that has been at a hospital, often rushing down to the emergency room. There's a lot of energy in those footsteps. There's a lot of information in transfer walking through what is essentially a magnetic field, yeah? What do I mean by that? I've talked about in other videos how our every action takes place in the magnetic field of not just the Earth, but the universe, and that we are information moving through that. Much like how energy is moved through the film of a cassette, of an old school cassette or VHS tape on a magnetic strip to create a recording. And that is similar to what's going on here. And the more intense the moment is, the more energy is moving through that field, and more likely to create a memory that the place will replay. So how do we repeat, or how do we replicate this phenomena? Well, the best way is through repetition. Obviously, we could have intense moments, but without causing tragedy and doing things that I'm just not going to advise and could cause you a lot of problems in your life, it's hard to create extremely intense moments. Yeah? So, the idea then is to create repetition with intent. Rather than being focused on intensity of whatever it is you're doing, you are focused on the intensity of the intent of creating a recording as you go up and down the hallway to create the echo of your footsteps. Ideally, you'd be doing this at the same time every day and trying to place your footsteps on the exact same location. If you're not trying to haunt somewhere that you have access to all the time and are simply trying to create an echo, you could do this repeatedly on the same day, trying to create an echo, and it may have some effect, but ideally we want to be doing it almost as exactly the same every time, and with intensity of intent. You see, once you understand the actual mechanics of what occurs to create this recording, that makes it easier to tune into, because you actually know what you're doing rather than doing it by accident. You're actually focusing in on creating the echo. Now, if this is your own location, and as in it's your residence, or somewhere you're going to be for quite a while and have access to the location, this repeater ghost is similar to how we would create anchor points, as I discussed in the video about how to haunt a house after your own death. So these repeaters, repetitive actions like this, are also beneficial to you in that after you die, those recordings are something you can access as an action that you took. Okay, so why would we want these repeater ghosts? These are the ones that's very much mostly for aesthetic purposes. This is just kind of a astral decoration in a lot of ways. That being said, it could potentially be used to frighten away intruders, that sort of thing. If you maybe found a way to get the echo to occur whenever someone unexpected came. Like perhaps whenever anyone unexpected comes over, you would immediately knock on the wall 4 times with intent. In that way, whenever anyone comes over unexpected, eventually there would be a repetition there. And perhaps if someone broke into your home, they would immediately hear 4 knocks on the door and frighten them away. That, of course, is experimental and theoretical. I haven't actually tried that. I do have experience with an actual ghost, that any time that a cop came by the house, the place I was living at the time was very obviously at some point it was a drug den at some point, and the lookout had remained as a ghost. So this wasn't exactly a repeater phenomenon, but anytime a cop came by that house at all, even if a cop just drove down the road, you would hear this shh sound on the inside of the screen of the spirit, letting us know that we needed to be aware there was a cop coming. Yeah, obviously it wasn't a drug den when I lived there. I'm just saying that the spirit of the ghost beforehand. I'm assuming that's what it was, because I never made a very good contact with the ghost. But anytime a ghost came around, anytime there was any kind of cop around, the ghost let us know immediately. Anyways, the next type of haunting is to bring on an actual ghost. And there are a few ways to do this. The most easily accessible is to create an ancestor shrine. And I already have a video on how to do that. I'll leave a link to that here. But the idea here is that we are the anchor. Yeah? Because our ancestors are connected to our blood and to our DNA. There is a memory within our DNA that connects to every ancestor in our past. And the more that our ancestors are in tune with that, the more powerful that idea can become. And like I said, I have some videos on that can help bring your ancestors to an area, but really it's just the idea of accepting that, allowing, being open to the idea of your ancestors to come to you. And if there are any that want to speak with you, that's all it will take, is being open to the idea. And if you invite them into your home, well, now you have a haunting, but a positive haunting coming from your ancestors. Even when working with one's ancestors, I do want to say, if you're just going to give an open invite to the home, you should still say that they need to come with good intent and no ill will, because not everything in our bloodlines from our past is necessarily going to be positive. Yeah, we all have bad things in our past as well as good. So it is important to say that even when working with one's ancestors. We could also draw other spirits into a home. This would be more doable if it was the ghost of someone who had lived in the place that you were working with, or at least visited that place. And then you would find out the person's name and call them back to that location as much as one would summon any other spirits. You could create a circle, call their name, call out their name, and give them offerings. The more you know about this person, the better, of course. And if it's someone you knew, that's going to have a much better effect. Now, one caveat here: you want to make sure this spirit is willing, that this ghost is willing to be summoned and willing to be brought back into the home. Because an unwilling spirit, well, first of all, that's essentially kidnapping. But also, they're not going to be friendly. They're not going to cooperate. They're much more likely to cause problems if they don't want to be there. So I don't recommend forcing a person forcing someone's ghost into your home. Inflating their caw. Especially what we're doing here is inflating their caw from a distance and drawing it back into the home from the residual energy of the place where they used to dwell. I have a few videos on inflating caw spirits and a little bit more about what exactly is going on there. I'll leave a link to that as well. Okay, so third option is, well, yes, there's a few different options here, but third option would be to intentionally create a servitor that has physical aspects, makes sounds, that sort of things. I guess we've been more working with an egregore at this point, or the replicating servitors. In fact, in the replicating servitor video, I believe I mentioned one that actually closes the door for someone. Yeah, that is a replicating servitor I have seen, and it actually worked to make sure that their door stayed closed. And that was simply by putting a sigil near the door with intent and focusing on it over time and believing in it. And again, especially with these servitors, repetition is going to be a big part of this. You can really do this with any type of created beings. The one that would be the most historically known is actually the real version of what a tulpa is before it got westernized into its current concept that we talk about in chaos magic. Originally, this is something that was at monasteries, and the monks at the monastery, these are Buddhist monasteries, would come up with an idea of this being that was the tulpa for that monastery. And they all simply shared belief in this being, and with a shared idea of what it looked like, what it did, what its actions were, its name, that sort of thing. And they all shared this belief together, and that created this tulpa. You can do the exact same thing in your home by simply making up a being and convincing everyone else in your home to also believe in this being, and simply putting the energy into it. And when you hear things, blame it on the ghost, and eventually it'll start doing things on its own, beyond just you blaming things like, oh, that was probably the ghost. The reason you're going to be blaming things on it that it didn't actually do is to help create that belief and help get your mind into the idea that the ghost can do things. So this is a kind of a fake it till you make it approach to creating a ghost. And that wouldn't be a ghost, of course. This is a created being, but you can still refer to it as the ghost. Better to give it a clear name so that it has a more cohesiveness. And if you do this, this is one that you're very much going to want to take everything into account. What it does when you're not around, what it does when it's bored. You'll want to find what it likes, what it doesn't like. You have to think up every detail of what it does, because especially with a shared tulpa like that, any detail you don't fill in, it's eventually going to fill in on its own as it becomes more aware. And also when creating such things, another thing that I would recommend is some sort of emergency failsafe. What I mean by that is, as you create the being, have some idea of what you would do to stop the being or even erase it if it becomes too aware or becomes a problem. Now that being said, once something becomes completely self-aware, in my opinion, it exists forever and also essentially has a will of its own. So when you erase it, it's not going to be gone completely, but it'll have gone somewhere else and exist in its own reality after that. But there is still some idea of, I guess the word is responsibility. Yeah, even created beings have some rights, especially once they become self-aware, because then they begin to experience. So we don't want to be cruel to these beings as we create them. We want them to have backstories that are reasonable. We don't want to create a bunch of horror into their story. We want to make them... You can have the full story, an interesting story, but we don't want to be unreasonably cruel when we create these beings, or to what we do to them after they gain awareness. Yeah? Okay, so let's see. We've talked about repeater ghosts. We've talked about how to bring your ancestors into the home. I mentioned the videos that you can go to for that. I do have other videos on creating cause spirits, which is essentially the same thing as a ghost. And this can be done with skulls from, well, any type of skull. Boris from the cash cow sigil, he is a cause spirit, as well as, oh, let me just pull her off here, as well as Strid. We've had videos about her before as well. And this is essentially creating a ghost. The difference here is that these types of ghosts aren't always given permission to roam about the house when they are not being worked with. Strid certainly does not. Strid mostly only inflates when she is placed on my hand. Boris moves around, but there is nothing in him that makes any type of ghost activity. So if you were going to use a skull to create a haunting, you would want to specifically work that into the cause spirit as you were awakening it. And like I said, I have a video on that, which I will leave a link to above. Let me just put Strid away over here. We'll just set her off to the side for the moment. Okay, so those are some of the ways to create a haunting. The other, of course, is to bring, rather than a ghost, an actual spirit, demon, or any type of being like that. And for those, what you want to do is simply create an anchor point, like I talked about in the video on creating anchor points if you were going to try to become a ghost yourself. But in this point, these anchor points would be created by summoning the demon and then getting it to agree to create an anchor point at that location and allowing it access to an area on a more permanent basis. And at that point, you would also then draw their sigil on that location to help finalize that anchor point. And then that spirit has a way to come and go from that location. This can also be done with creating dolls or other types of idols for a spirit, and then the haunting is actually in the doll or idol itself, and so it can be taken from location to location. Okay, so even though that would be a great segue into how to take a ghost with you when you move, there is one other type of haunting that can be created that I want to talk about. And that is, there are many of us who are essentially portals in and of ourselves. Yeah? And we draw ghosts to us simply with our presence. And a lot of us aren't necessarily aware of that. So if it seems like everywhere you move is haunted, well, it might not be the locations, yeah? In fact, this is something that those of us that do this, it's important to be aware, because anywhere that you spend more than a few nights can begin becoming haunted. And you don't want to be accidentally haunting people's houses without their permission. And the way to avoid this is simply to state, before you go to bed, at these places where you don't want to create any kind of thinning of the veil, that you are not allowing ghosts access to this location by sleeping there. Yeah? And if any of you are having these type of problems, that's probably what's going on. There's a lot of us. And in fact, we can play with this and actually find ways to open up portals with our dreams and make the place more and more haunted. Where I'm living currently is extremely haunted because I'm allowing that to take place on a regular basis. Okay, so before we get into how to take a ghost with you when you leave, I'm going to be doing some experiments with this idea of creating ghosts now that I have this ghost tour job, depending on what all I am able to get away with as far as preparing the route, that sort of thing. So I will have some updates on this hopefully throughout the coming year and my experience on the ghost tour. It's for U.S. Ghost Adventures. If any of you are going to be in the Salt Lake City area and would like to take a tour, I don't have a link at the moment. In a future video, once I've spoken with them and gotten permission, hopefully I will be able to leave a link in a video for you all to check it out. But I'm not ready for that just yet. So that will be upcoming. So now that that's all out of the way, now we will move on to how to take a ghost with you when you move. Okay, like I mentioned a little while ago, this idea of mobile anchors. That is the primary way that we can take a ghost with us. You see, what I mean by mobile anchors is like the idols or the dolls that I talked about earlier. And so we have to create one of these for the ghost. Now there are ways to capture a ghost without their consent. And I have had videos on that, like the Caribbean Ghost Trap, which I had a video on. And for that we just use a gourd. Even a small one like this will work. Cut one hole in the side to allow the ghost in, with a smaller hole on the top to allow some flow out, but not enough for the ghost's energy itself to get out, and we can actually trap them inside of a gourd or anything like that. Well, really, what I mean, like a coconut or any living thing that has this type of structure will work. So a gourd works because it contains life force. It can draw in and have them trapped. A coconut that you cut a big hole in the side and left a small hole in the top through one of the eyes would work as well. Even a pumpkin. Really anything that has that hollow space inside and is able to contain living energy will work. Like I said, I already have a video on that, so I'm not going to spend much more time on the idea of the ghost trap. But once you have something in the ghost trap and bring it somewhere else, you can break it apart and allow the being back out. Or you can blow through the top if you don't want to break the ghost trap, or if it's made of something too hard to break. That being said, once again, I don't recommend taking ghosts against their will. So the ghost trap can be used if the ghost is having trouble creating an anchor point. Because a lot of times with these ghosts, they don't necessarily understand how to do these things themselves. So even with a willing ghost, you might want to wind up using a gourd or something like that, so that the ghost can essentially be drawn in just by getting close, and there's not a lot for them to do on their end besides allow themselves to go into the ghost trap and be opened up to the new location. That being said, the better the ghost is at connecting to things, there are better ways to go about this. And especially creating a doll, like a popit, but one that you will create for the ghost itself. And of course, for this, you're going to need the ghost's permission and cooperation, because the ghost is going to actually enter into the doll as you were making it. This would assume that you have lived in a location for a while and have been interacting with the ghost, and if you don't know their name in life, you have at least come up with a name for them that you would be calling the doll and having them come into it as you create the doll and sew the ends closed, or however you make it. You can make a yarn doll, you can make a classic popit, which is the cloth sewn into like a paper doll type shape and with some cotton inside. Or if you are creating a doll from location, from a place, ideally you'd want something from that place that you could take with you. Even if it was just vacuuming the floor and putting the dust from the floor into the doll as you were making it, to help help facilitate that connection. And then when you move, you would take the doll with you to the new location and put it into the house somehow. Ideally, if you could put it in one of the walls so that the ghost can be sealed into the new home, that would be the best way to go about this. A lot of times, if the ghost isn't necessarily stuck to the home, really all you would need to do is give the ghost permission. So a lot of this, again, depends on the skill level of the ghost. And, well, if it's one that's not aware, if it's just one roaming around, of course, you're going to have to use the ghost trap. But the more aware the ghost is, the more cooperation you can get. And like I said, with the skill level. Now, I don't believe this would work with a repeater ghost. Like, you're not going to capture the sound of the footsteps. You're not going to be able to capture that memory into a ghost trap of any type. So, I don't think that you could keep those type. But perhaps anything beyond that, if it has a form even, then you should be able to at least draw it to the new location. Now, one point I want to make here is that unless you've actually found the anchor points in the old home and removed them, this ghost isn't just going to be where you took it. It will remain at the old location as well, unless you sever those anchor points. Which means finding the locations in that home where the ghost has made a link and banishing those links one by one until just like you would in any time you're getting rid of a ghost. Ideally, you would do this after you've already removed the ghost. Yeah, so you've brought the ghost into the doll, taken it to the new location, placed the doll into the wall, and then go back to the old house and cut the links if you don't want it returning to the old location. And again, if you're at the point where you're working with the doll, I would get the ghost's permission and consent before you sever those old links. Because if it's able to enter into a doll of its own volition, we are dealing with something here that has will and has rights. Yeah. So again, don't take it against its will, because that's kidnapping, and it's just going to fight you, and it's not going to be a good situation. So get permission, get consent, make an agreement. Anytime you are bringing a ghost to a location or changing its location. Assuming the ghost isn't a problematic one and we are removing it to get it out of the area because it's causing a problem. Okay. So I feel like I did some rambling tonight, but that's okay. Let's see. Is there anything else that we want to cover while we're talking about this? We covered cause spirits. We covered repeater ghosts. There is some other videos that you might find interesting in relation to this video, like the Legend of Six video, which I will leave a link for as well. And that's the from the Sorcerer's Shadow volume on God, Ghosts, and Spirits. And I tell the story of the Legend of Six, which was one of the first ghosts I ever intentionally created from an urban legend that wasn't actually true. So, that's going to be it for this episode. Thank you once again for joining us. If you haven't subscribed to the channel, please take the opportunity to do so now. And since you followed me to the end of the video, go ahead and smash that like button, as they say, yeah? Because the likes do help. Anyways, bright blessings and an interesting fate. This has been Sorcerer Tal.